Right, let alone at length. Right,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
You're already quite good.
That's what's so great about these kinds of events. These smaller, more focused events on in this case, a particular creator and their works, right? As opposed to just sort of general grab bag, whatever. And that's not to say, again, I love comic shows. I love San Diego Comic-Con and movies and video games and toys, and there's moments where you feel swept up in these gargantuan events, but every particular thing is fighting for its tiny slice of that bit, and here we get to go deep dive and just go deeper and more. It's fun.
Hey guys, there's a piano there. Are you going to give us a preview of some of the Conan musical stuff?
Clearly, yeah.
I'm going to crank out some pulling doors right now.
A little bit of soft shoe coming up. That's how we're going to do it.
I'll go.
That's right.
I get kind of saying that piano was used to knock the panel to stop.
Are you stop?
Weird.
Yeah. That's amazing.
I think Funcom's done a pretty good job with the musical version. He did the soundtrack for Age of Conan.
I don't know if you guys picked up the Arrow restoration of the Conan movie, the new Ultra 4K and all that stuff. They have like every documentary, every making of special, everything. They did a fantastic job compiling all that stuff. And they have the joke Conan the Musical. They got the permission from the dude who did the joke, and they cut it with the 4K footage.
Oh gosh.
So you have this perfect surround sound version of this goofy YouTube video. It's amazing. I was like so happy playing that on my big screen.
James, when we get back to the pavilion, there's a guy who wants you to sign either come Conan, so remind me, I'll introduce you. Think about it while you're here.
I just want to see a video of the show they had at Universal that I never got to see.
Oh,
Our YouTube channel, actually.
the stage
Oh,
show.
the show?
Yeah.
This, by the way, if you guys are not watching the official Conan
Yes.
YouTube channel, this is Sean Curley. He's your Viking-headed host normally. He's got the helmet on. The new videos are great. They're lore
really
videos, they're interviews, and they're going to do some really cool deep dive stuff. Sean's filming a bunch of footage for this weekend, so you may see yourself in and amongst the montage.
Right? But yeah, make sure to check it out, subscribe. It's really good.
It's super fun.
Interested. I have like a VHS tape, so digitizing it up present.
Oh, when I heard about it, I was like, I'm aged out. I can't go see this thing.
I mean, it's cool, but it's basically He-Man because it has nothing to do with Conan, but it's only a name pretty much. But it is fun. I think it's like fighting a giant
I
snake.
noticed at the auction there was a picture of Paul Simon with all the girls from one of those things.
Yeah.
He was here a couple of years ago. He was at the movie set. He was telling stories from behind the scenes when he had run out and things like that.
I mean, it's really cool because they're using like real flames and practical effects.
So it's not like a Spider-Man music that was up for a year.
No, I think it's exactly how those go like in between rides, like that Ghostbusters show and they have Conan. So it's like a live stage show that happens like 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Years ago, watching action, the guy who played the Conan live action series,
Ralph.
Yeah,
He showed up again, walking around the Renaissance Fair.
Wow.
We're just like,
Wait a minute.
he's just like having the time of his life. Some people recognize him, a lot of people don't.
God, that series has like a Tower of the Elephant adaptation. But it's, I mean,
It was definitely
You know.
interesting series.
yeah. But it's still kind of cool. Crom, they have Crom in that show, and he looks like a male model from like 90s New York.
Bobby White Crom.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Crom is there.
They're gonna be like, how deep are the cuts you're gonna do, Jim?
It's so weird.
I'm like, that's probably a field too far. Thank you.
Yeah, and Don Rickles is in the pilot.
Don Rickles.
Yeah.
The first star they thought of.
Oh my God.
It says guest starring Don Rickles.
Did you
Wow.
see the Tower of the Elephant Funcom game they didn't actually put out?
Yeah, we're actually uploading that on our YouTube.
They came and played it for us one year. They were playing it.
Oh, crazy.
So I interviewed Joel.
And John Rhys Davies is the voice of the thief.
Wow.
I interviewed Joel and a mini documentary on Brenda, and we're trying to get John Rhys Davies for an interview for it as well. So that's what I'm holding out for. But yeah, we're going to pull all the footage up. And we have Joel doing a playthrough and describing, there's more details to it that we're revealing.
That's awesome.
We wanted to make it
This is the official Conan YouTube channel. So it's just Conan the Barbarian on YouTube.
Conan the Barbarian official.
Official, yeah, and it's,
Barbarian official?
yeah, they just, just a few months they've been uploading stuff.
Yeah, like just barely a month.
Yeah, so,
We got a Roy Thomas interview on
yeah,
there.
the Roy Thomas interview.
Good.
And these
Jeff
three
Shanks.
all have
Yeah,
interviews.
yeah.
All of
We're
us.
slightly
Yeah,
biased.
John's coming up probably.
John's this week.
Yeah, cool.
Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, that game that we wanted it to be not just Tower of the Elephant, but it was going to be clean up a bunch
Yeah,
of
go
those.
through all the.
And yeah, everything cool.
It's 11 o'clock.
It is. We got any stragglers out there in the hall? If not, all right. Let's do it. Hey, all right, turn on the mics. Let's do this. First panel of the day. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
You guys been having a good time at Howard Days this weekend?
Oh, yeah.
Excellent. We got more people coming in. We were chatting a little bit before the panel, but I'd like to get another show of hands. How many people are here for the first time? Look at this. We got a lot of first timers here. This is awesome. Excellent. You guys you are having a good time, I hope. Yeah. Enjoying the panels. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we're gonna jump right in and start talking about Conan and popular culture today, and maybe we'll dabble in some of Howard's other characters in pop culture too. Right? Conan's obviously the biggie. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump in and start talking about this. So I'm Jeff Shanks. I guess most people call me a Howard Scholar, which also sounds pretentious a little bit, but
I think here you can say that with confidence.
I feel like I've literally published peer-reviewed articles on Robert House. Like officially, legally, that makes me a Howard Scholar, right? Along with some of you here in the audience. I've done a lot of work on the side as a consultant on some of the projects over the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. Working with now heroic signatures and in their previous incarnations. A lot of the work I did a lot of work on the Conan role-playing game from Modiphius, consulted on some of the comics, been a consultant on some projects I can't talk about, never came to fruition, sadly. So that's been kind of my role as someone who's a Robert E. Howard scholar, working on some of these modern projects of Conan and some of the other characters out there in popular culture, and trying to keep things as true to the spirit of Robert E. Howard as possible. Sweet.
I'm John Hocking. I wrote the pastiche Conan the Emerald Lotus, which appeared back in 1995. I've seen more copies of that over the past few hours than I have in the past 25 years. Thanks. I wrote a sequel to it, or a follow-up, called Conan the Living Plague, which is nearly published a couple of times in the intervening years between now and 95. And both these books will be packaged together, both the previously published Lotus and the unpublished Conan the Living Plague, in a book called Conan, City of the Dead, which is coming out till the 18th. But it's too bad I can't show it to you now, because I'm proud of it, and it's been a long time coming. But yeah, it's on its way, and I'm pleased to hear that.
Give it up for John. My name is Jim Zub, and it's my first Howard Days as well. I'm Canadian, I'm from Toronto, and I'm the current flagship writer of Conan Barbarian on the comic series being published by Titan. And I work directly for Heroic Signatures, for Fred and Jay, and building this amazing new kind of publishing initiative. We relaunched the Conan comic series last summer. It's been almost a year since the first issue, and the response from the fan base, from many of you, has been electric. It's been like this just phenomenal ride. I wrote my first Conan story for Dark Horse, co-wrote with Gail Simone in 2015 on the Conan Red Sonja miniseries. I've written for Marvel. I did the flagship series there for a little while. Currently, I'm the only comic writer who's written Conan for 3 different comic publishers, but that's going to change as the new Savage Sword series that we relaunched in March is now, kicking butt, and back in the original format, oversized, beautiful, bold, black and white, and very bloody. And we're very, very proud of it, and we're so thrilled to be bringing this series to you. If you guys haven't had a chance to check it out, we've got copies over at the Pavilion. Make sure you do, and thank you. We're going to be talking a lot about this stuff, but obviously I frame a lot of this through the comic books. But I'm a huge, obviously Howard fan of the prose and everything else.
So, So, I often talk about Conan as being one of those characters in popular culture. That's something we were talking about the other night that has, like Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, Tarzan, characters that have transcended the original medium in which they first appear, right? And Conan now falls into that sort of pantheon.
Archetype.
An archetype, right? And I made the point, like, my son is, Superman, Batman also fall into this category, which is a little harder to think about for some of us that really think about these as comic book characters, right? But I made the point. My son is 20 years old, and just asked him the other night, "Hey, where did you first come across Batman?" It wasn't a comic book; it was the Bruce Timm animated series, right? He thinks of Batman not as a comic book character necessarily, but as an animated character, a cartoon character, a video game character, like Arkham Asylum, right? So Conan is now like that as well, right? Conan is a character that has transcended that original medium, those original stories that Robert E. Howard wrote. Those stories are always sacrosanct. You know me, and those of you that know me know, I'm a Howard purist, all that, right? And but we have those Howard stories. They're always going to be out there now. So it's okay now to let the character, I think, be free to be explored in other media. And sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't, right? But, that's okay. It's because Conan has become an archetype, almost a mythic, example of the barbarian hero, the barbarian warrior.
No, I don't think there's a sum about it. I think it's absolutely, if you were not, we're in Crossplains, so this is too biased, but if you were in any city in North America, and I'd say most major cities in the world, and you just walked out on the street, grabbed some random person, this isn't a Comic-Con, this isn't some, pop culture time of year, and you just say the word barbarian, if you say, name a fantasy character, they will probably say Conan. And that's probably the only one they know by name. In general, like your great-grandmother or someone, or your grandmother, or you're just an average person. Some people might say, whatever, Mother of Dragons or something like that, but even that's gonna fade. Like it doesn't have that archetypical power or that iconic power like Conan does, as a singular hero, as the template.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the first real medium in which Conan was presented in outside of prose was comics. It may not be the comics you're even thinking of, right? There were these bootleg Mexican comics in the 1950s, La Reina de Costa Negra, right? And I have some of these. They're really fascinating. Actually, La Reina de Costa Negra, that Queen of the Black Coast, right? And in them, interestingly, Belit was the main character, and Conan is a side character, her boy toy, basically, her muscle, right? Which is fascinating. But comics is where it's the first medium outside of prose that Conan appeared in. Obviously we normally think of the Marvel comics, but for me, it was a version of the Marvel comics that first brought me to the character. So let me ask you this. How many people here were first brought to the character through the comics, the Marvel comics back in the day? Yeah. It's a few, right? How many people were brought to the character first through the film, the Arnold film? It's roughly about half and half.
It casts a heck of a shadow.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I know so many times, and I think it's because it's now generational. There's different waves of people that have come to it and seen that movie and love aspects of it, or now are very critical of aspects of it because it's so different from the prose source. But I don't think any of us can deny just pure kind of bombastic entertainment. One of the best soundtracks of all time.
Can't argue with that.
What's that?
You can't argue with that.
No, and that's whenever people ask me about the movie, do you like it, do you hate it? As a kid, I absolutely loved it. It felt like the D&D adventures we always wanted to have, the crazy heists and the real danger. And with so many 70s and 80s fantasy movies that felt really hokey, and they had the synthy soundtracks, and they had these garbagey special effects, it felt much weightier, it felt more intense and more emotional. It took itself seriously. Maybe not every single part of it, hit as strong as you would want it to, and it didn't hew as close to the source as you wanted to. But I've always said when people ask me about it, I go, when another Conan movie happens, and we have to feel confident, it's a matter of when, not if, that you look to the Milius film not as something to copy, but something to learn from. To say, if we can hew closer to the source material, but keep entertainment and that bombast and that intensity in mind, and find that middle ground, then you've got something amazing, something really special.
John, what was your first introduction to the character?
My first introduction was Lancer paperbacks.
Yeah.
I was introduced to those at a very young age, and they made a powerful impression on me. And I wanted almost to chip in on Marvel Comics, as I initially was very skeptical that a comic book could capture what I read in the Lancers. And so I blew off Conan the comic for many years until I finally sat down and read some, saw some fine art from Barry Windsor Smith and some superior writing from Roy Thomas, which kind of it lifted my awareness of how Conan could succeed in a dramatically different medium. It wasn't just, you know, Howard's words on the page, where that was it, that was the core. But someone like Thomas and his artists were able to adapt it in a very different fashion and to different demands and for a slightly different audience, and still carry
keep to the Comics Code Authority on that monthly
it's
book.
true,
Yeah.
and yet still deliver something that felt closer. It felt closer to the core than I thought it could get, and so it turned me into a comic collector at the time.
My older brother, he's sort of my proto-nerd, so most of the stuff that I got into, whether it was Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy and sci-fi, or eventually, you know, role-playing games, and it's just all those things. He was 4 years ahead of me, that perfect age where I was like, I want to be like the older boys, my older cousins and my brother, and whatever they got into, I wanted to get into. So he would finish reading a book, and then he would hand it to me, and then I would read it. And I didn't like the sci-fi as much. I loved the sword and sorcery. And he had some of the Lancers, and so I started reading some of those. But I was reading everything. I was reading Fritz Leiber and like all that stuff. And then we got into Dungeons and Dragons, and being able to create those stories, being able to generate them in the moment. And also, I was such a scrawny little kid, I couldn't play sports or do things with them. Even video games, my hand-eye coordination wasn't as good. But in the moment, my dice rolls are as good as anyone else's. And also, to my older brother, he never listens to me. On my turn, he has to listen to me. And if I can make him laugh, if I can make the table laugh, or if I could come up with something inventive they hadn't thought of,
Win.
I'm like one of the older boys. That feedback loop of to entertain and to create, it lit a fire of creativity in me that has never really been quenched. Seriously, and you know, I try to explain to people why these games are so wonderful. That interactivity and that creativity that they can generate, and that confidence that they give you. So really, D&D is all mixed in with the sword and sorcery and the pulp and the dark kind of unknown and the mystery, and that's all really formative to me as a storyteller.
You know what? That's kind of a good point about. But let's talk about the gaming for a second, because after the comics, role-playing games were really the next place that Conan appeared outside of prose, even before the film, right? Right? Look at that right there, right? You know, Gary Gygax always made a secret of how much of an influence, you know, Howard's work had on the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. Very much so. You know, Arneson was probably more of a Tolkien guy, you know, but most of that early sword and sorcery influence on Dungeons and Dragons, it came through Gary. He was a big fan of all of that. And you know, how many people are familiar with Appendix N, right? Yeah, look at all those hands. Now we're talking.
Do you want to give some context for people who didn't interrupt their hand up? So
talk about
in
Appendix N.
the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, in the backs, there's all these appendices. Gary was verbose, let's say. He would write these rambling, the rules are not always wonderfully organized. There's rules buried within paragraphs, and there's all this stuff. But there's gold in Demdar Hills. There's a reason why it became so popular, and you know, now 50 years later is still this pop culture staple. Appendix N is in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's essentially a reading list. It's a reading list of the books that influenced Dungeons and Dragons. And far more than I think people realize. If you start to check, like literally the Vancian, the magic system is taken from a particular book, and the dungeon delving concept is taken from a particular book, and creatures are just wholesale ripped off from all kinds of those books. If you go through Appendix N, it is the DNA of the game, and Howard's works is definitely formative within that.
Yeah, one of the first actual appearances of Conan was in an early issue of Dragon magazine that Gary wrote an article and gave him stats for the first time, like at different ages. We were talking about that the other night with Bill. And then right about the same time, and I think it was just after that, what was it, the gods, I forget the name of the supplement for the white box. It was before Deities and Demigods. It was the white book supplement that became, it was like the prototype that would become, thank you, Legends of Lore, that would become Deities and Demigods later, had a whole Hyborian Age section in it, right, that didn't make the cut for Deities and Demigods for legal reasons, right? And in there you get, and it was taken from the camp edited stuff, and there's a lot of pastiche stuff mixed in it, but that was really the first time you got Conan and other Hyborian Age characters and entities and things like that statted out for D&D. Right from the beginning, of gaming, Conan was a large part of that, and that was another appearance of Conan the Barbarian.
And again, this idea of, I understand the purists that talk about, okay, only the Howard works is canon, agreed.
Right.
But on the other hand, these extensions, the movies, the games, the comics, they're bringing people into the fold. They're creating visibility that just could not exist otherwise. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You had no idea these things existed until the visions of those things, the advertising, the artwork captured you. Whether it's a Frank Frazetta cover or a Barry Windsor Smith comic or an Arnold Schwarzenegger poster. It doesn't, whatever brought you to the dance, it doesn't really matter as long as you're here and here with us. That's the most important thing.
Well, yeah, those pastiche Conan novels. What do we think about those? For those of you, many of you probably know this, that most of the Howard stories were, most of us came to the prose stories, and the edited, 12-volume set, eventually 12 volumes, they were edited by DeCamp, Lynn Carter, where they took Howard stories, edited some, added their own, those kinds of things. But then after that, there started to be a whole series of Conan pastiche novels throughout the 80s and into the 90s, many of them, and of varying quality. And there's some name authors that contributed to them, like Robert Jordan, some guy named John Hawking. Let's talk about that, like the writing the pastiche novels. Well, John, tell us about that. How did you come to it? How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I did everything possible wrong. My fandom's been primarily solitary my whole life long. I got frustrated with the tone of a lot of the Tor pastiches. I've said that before, which got me a sharp jab from John Maddox Roberts once. I shouldn't speak evil of the Tor pastiches. It's much like a guy dressed up like a clown saying, "Down with clowns." But the brute fact of the matter is, as I wasn't getting what I wanted out of the Tor pastiches I was reading, and I thought, I should try to do that. Why not? It'll be fun. And so I spent a couple years writing Conan the Emerald Lotus. I finished it and didn't know what in the world I would do with the thing. Can I send it anywhere? Do I put it in a drawer and write it off as therapy? What do I do? I ended up connecting with Glenn Lord, connected me with Conan Properties, and the rest is history. It got sent off to them. They decided they liked it, but that is literally like a lightning strike.
So, what was how many books had you written previous to that?
Only one I wrote for myself when I was in college. Is utterly unreadable and should be destroyed.
But you still have it, don't you?
I think so. Yeah. Exactly.
So that is highly, highly unusual. Obviously, especially coming to. It's one of those situations where you create a nightmare where people will point and then go, well, he did it. And then you're like, no, but that's not how you're supposed to. No, but look, he did. He just wrote a thing and he sent it in and they published it.
And they warned me too. I wrote and I said I completed a novel about Conan the Cimmerian. And they were like, oh, that's great. We get those all the time. We never accept them. But you said you completed it. And I said, yeah, it's done. We'll look at it. And then 2 days later, I got a letter by FedEx saying we want it. And I had to go lay down.
Well, I will say this among a lot of the hardcore fans, they obviously, like I said, the pastiches often didn't have a lot of the hardcore Howard fans, I should say.
Right.
Let me clarify that. Most of the pastiche novels were, varying degrees of grudging, like, John Maddox Roberts was one of the others that people liked, but always, almost unanimously, yeah, the one that I liked best Conan and the Emerald Oaks, unanimously. Like it was that, and then Carl Edward Wagner's Road to Keys was okay too, right? It's funny because actually how many people are familiar with Carl Edward Wagner? Of course.
This is the right audience.
It's the right audience. It was kind of a rhetorical. He wrote Road of Kings, which is another one of the more fan favorite pastiche novels.
That's a fine pastiche.
Yeah. But a lot of people actually like his Grammy Moore pastiche editions of the Dad better than his Conan pastiche, right? So really, Emerald Oaks, it's up there, and that's tough. It's somehow you unlock the key that
The key, I think, if I was old, I think the key is Weird Tales. I tried to put in more Weird Tales supernatural horror flavor.
There you go.
That's it.
Yeah.
Do you know what's funny, John? Like we were talking about this a little bit yesterday when we weren't just being goofballs. But we were talking about the fact that it's much harder. The tight wire act for you is much harder because you're playing in Howard's medium, the prose medium, right? Because the comics were already an adaptation and went sort of their own way in a lot of different spots. It still brought in a lot of people. That monthly output was so important. Not that being compared to Roy Thomas is also very stressful, and even Kurt Busiek and all these other people, but there's still that sense of I've got a little bit more open road in terms of the guardrails aren't so tight. You know what I mean? People are like, well, there's already all kinds of different comic stories, so these are other ones. And you're like, yeah, and these ones are cool too, And so I feel like the less pressure on me. Where I felt the crazy pressure was in the new Savage Sword magazine, I deigned to write a prose short story. You're bold. You fool. Because not only was I writing a prose story, but it was a short story, which is, of course, exactly what Howard was doing. And Joe Gisco did a brand new cover, first Conan cover in 20 years, and then I had the audacity to write a story based on that image, and I have never sweated over a project so much. For such a short, it's 2 pages, it's 3,000 words, and every sentence of that was just like the vein popping out of my forehead, because I really felt that legacy and that pressure. So I can't imagine writing an entire novel with my stomach tied in knots like that. So
when I wrote it primarily for my own enjoyment, so I didn't feel much pressure at all.
Oh man.
I just wondered if it worked for me, and if it did, great. If not, rewrite it.
Yeah, in some ways it was like, because we had the success of the comic, and now we knew all eyes are on this new Savage Sword. Don't mess this one up, And then it's like, oh, and the dude thinks he can write prose. Oh yeah, all right, kid, let's see what you got. And you're like, oh no, here we go. But it was fun. Now in the rearview mirror that it's finished, and people have asked me if I want to do more, and I do. But yeah, it definitely feels more pressure for that. That's for sure.
So that's kind of how I feel now, with dabbling in writing my first comic story. Right?
Yeah, in Savage Sword number 4.
So I'm going to have my first comic story in Savage Sword number 4. I write the essays in the back. I can write nonfiction. I can
I'm
do
sure
the
you can be
academic
critical. Now come to our side.
I know, right? And here I am, like sort of self-described Howard purist, and I just wrote a pastiche.
There you go. The rot has begun.
It's unfortunately it's and it's a similar kind of thing. I dabble in prose. I've edited prose. I did a fiction magazine with Mark Chris for a little while, but the story is going to be a Conrad and Kirwan story.
For those of you who don't know who these characters are, I'm sure this audience, more of you proportionately know than anywhere else in the world that I would say this, but they're 2 of these occult investigator characters.
Right. Occult detectives, occult archaeology, even there's a lot of ancient artifact kind of stuff there, very Lovecraftian fiction. It was Howard trying to do Lovecraft type stories, right, in his own way. And so those of you who don't know, I'm an archaeologist in my day job. So I figure, okay, at least it's not too much of a stretch if I'm writing the occult archaeology carriages. I can maybe pull this off. It's kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark meets Lovecraft, right? What's not to love there? But it's very different. I dabbled in prose. I wrote a couple of pieces for the Modifius role-playing game, fictional pieces in the voice of Kirwan. So I felt somewhat comfortable, but it is so different going, even somebody that's read comics my whole life, been a comics guy, right, to try and write that, I got a lot of help from Jim, editorial assistants here, but just thinking about how do you translate that into this very different visual medium, right? Where
You're also
trying to
writing a
integrate text.
document for the artist,
Right.
and then they're going to translate the visuals, and then you're
Right.
finalizing the
Yeah.
dialogue and the captions. So there's
So you're
these
also
two
art
sort of
directing
steps. Yeah, you're
as
art
well,
directing,
right?
and you don't want to close down the conversation. You want the artist to be able to put themselves into it. Some people, they're too vague.
Yeah.
They're just like, do whatever you want on this page. You're like, you need to tell them something, you know. Or they go the other way and they're like, in this panel, they should be turned slightly head upward at a 13-degree angle. And you're like, calm down. They're not your art robot. You know? Let them be creative for the love of God, you know. So you need to find that rhythm with people. Yeah.
Yes. And Jim was incredibly helpful. I'm doing some. He said, yeah, it's pretty good. He's very nice. Very nice. It's pretty good, but what
I
if
have no
you did
problem
this?
with the narrative. It's just comics as a medium. So
Yeah.
here's a bit of knowledge for you.
Right.
Comics have a unique bit of storytelling. Every 2 pages, you flip that page, what we call a reveal. So if you can build your story in these blocks of 2, these moments, changing scenes or big moments or surprises, or open up the 2-page spread, subconsciously, it creates this very naturalistic kind of flow to the storytelling. And so Jeff, all the moments happened in order,
Yep.
but we just need to shove some of them around and
Right.
move them back, or make this one the big anchor moment on
Yes.
the page. And now it feels like a comic.
And I did do a couple of this in my drafts. I knew enough to like, okay, I need to do a page reveal or 2.
Right.
Because that's what you do. You know, and I did that. And Jim's like, yeah, that's cute, you know. I see you read a couple of the books on how to do this, you know. But he's like, oh, what if we did this? Oh, yeah, that's good. You've done this before, haven't you?
Right? Well, and then the other thing too, again, is it's ideal when you're writing this for a specific artist, because then you know what their strengths are, and you can really lean into those qualities. I'm very thankful that the collaborators that we've got on the current comic series, we've got Rob Delatore, who is just a phenomenal talent, and he won an award yesterday for artistic achievement in Howard. And Doug Braithwaite, who is, I've been a fan of his for years and years and years, and both of them have very different aesthetics, and being able to lean into those and kind of go, I know what you do well, and I'm going to tune that up. You know, that's a really powerful thing.
John, let me ask you something. We were talking about like the pressure, like on some of these things. Your first novel, you had no pressure because you were writing for fun. But you know that like all the fans have been talking about, you know, I can't wait till John Hawkins finally finishes that sequel to Emerald Lotus, because now you have, now the pressure should be
Oh, I
on,
got a
right?
question for you. Did you do an edit pass on the new version?
Yeah.
I should hope so. I would kind of imagine having something buried that long and then going, yeah, just publish that.
I had to go over it. It has occurred to me on a number of occasions that there's a handful of fans who communicated with me down the years waiting for this book. So there's some people who've been waiting like 20 years for a book I wrote, you know, a very long time ago, and there's almost no way it's not going to be disappointing. You wait 20 years for something, and it's a pastiche, guys. It's a pulp paperback. And yeah, I put my heart into it. I worked real hard on it. It's a good, thrilling pastiche, but it's just a pastiche. Hope everybody likes it.
Pretty good, Jay.
I'm sure it's
It's going to be so awesome having that on your shelf. There's that moment where you're like, it finally comes full circle.
Oh yeah, like it almost was published twice. It was accepted for publication twice, and it just died on the doorstep both times. So because it hasn't landed yet. I mean, the Sun could still go Nova. Something could happen to keep it from off the bookstore shelves. That's what.
It's live in Europe.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. That's awesome. I think some people don't, you don't realize how long some of these things can take to gestate. Or sometimes you have an idea and it just sort of trickles there in the back of your mind, and then slowly turns into something. It has its own gravity. The story that got me on the map for Fred and Jay, I had done, like I said, the Conan Red Sonja. I had done, when Conan came back to Marvel, they insisted that the character have a team up with some superheroes to raise his profile, and so I did what was called Avengers No Road Home, and I tried to keep him in the Highborn age for as long as humanly possible on that story, because that's what was most exciting to me. And then, but both of those were co-written with other authors, even though I was doing the majority of the Conan stuff. No one knows that. They don't know what's mine or what's someone else's. And I didn't just want to always say if someone didn't like something, well, that wasn't me. But maybe it was. But, so I wanted to have a Conan story that was just me. And so Mark Basso, who was the editor, I cornered him at a convention, and I said, I have a solo Conan story. Savage Sword was a full-color anthology-style comic monthly they were putting out. And then I pitched this story that had been sticking in my craw for a long time. It was called The Gambler. And it's Conan ends up in this gambling hall where you can bet your life away. And he ends up in a situation where he can't just cut everyone down. He's trapped. And so he's got to use his mind and his guile. And of course, at some point, he's going to explode. There will be violence, but you never know when. And we were setting up the tension and then holding it as long as possible before that euphoric, explosive, violent destruction kicks in. And that was supposed to be my mic drop. This is what I think a Howard-style Conan story can be. It's all self-contained. It has a supernatural element that I will not reveal. It has funky, crazy payoffs, and we put our character through the ringer. And he gets to be Conan, but not just go up, kill a wizard, get the girl kind of stuff. And I thought that was it. That was my last chance to be the bard for the barbarian, and that would be that. And then what I didn't know was Jason Aaron was writing the monthly book, and he was only going to do 12 issues. He always does long runs. He does like 5-year runs on books. So when they announced him on the book, I was like, well, that's off the table. He's going to be doing that forever. And then when I handed in The Gambler, they were actively looking for a new writer, and I had no way to know that. So what I thought was my last chance to write Conan became my audition to take over Conan. And so that story is very special to me because it's kind of changed my life. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Conan in other media and pop culture. Howard's other characters, there have been a few, right? We've had a Solomon Kane movie, we've had a Call movie.
I wouldn't call that a Cole movie.
Technically, right? I mean, it really is, and it's really
By name only.
well, yeah. I mean, it really was. It was originally, for those who don't know, the Call the Conqueror movie with Kevin Sorbo was originally intended to be the third Conan movie, and it's loosely based on Hour of the Dragon. But they all very loosely.
Hanging by a thread.
There have been a few attempts, to, of course, and there's, sort of the Red Sonja movie, not really, that's really more the Roy Thomas version of the character. There was, other than that, there's very few of Howard's other characters or stories that have been adapted. One of the most notable is Pigeons from Hell, that was adapted in the old Thriller TV show. If any of you aren't familiar with that. Yeah, the Boris Karloff hosted show Thriller.
That is on YouTube.
Yeah, it's out there, and that may be the closest adaptation ever done to one of Howard's works in another medium. So if you haven't seen it, go on YouTube and check that one out. But I have a question for you two guys. Outside of Solomon, maybe Solomon, you can include Solomon Kane in Call, but outside of Conan, what other Howard characters or Howard stories would you like to see in other media? And what do you think would work, like, that hasn't been done yet, that should be done, right? Like, why hasn't this been done yet?
Right. You can go first.
You want to go, John?
You're on the hot seat.
What do you think?
Well, I think we could see a more and better Solomon Kane, I think.
Absolutely.
Than we've seen so far. The character is really compelling. And there's a bunch of Howard-ready stories that make for good, solid adaptations, I think. Also with Mighty Borak, it's just it's like hard-boiled, straight-up adventure.
Oh, yeah.
It's a supernatural.
Yeah, a sweeping adventure series. It would be really, really cool with El Borak. I think you could do Dark Agnes. That kind of sweeping, I don't want to say musketeer, but that, that sort of swordswoman, swordswoman kind of thing, that swashbuckling kind of air. And I think it could play really well and surprise people who assume that they know what Howard is and that it's just a male power fantasy, that you could create a character that would play well across the board and that you would really be able to bring a depth in it, that character can be, her rage and her violence could really shock people in a really cool kind of way, that she has a complexity to her that you could kind of play. I would think that could be really neat and unexpected. And when you say, oh, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, you think you're going to get one thing, and then it's like, check this out.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree 100% with all of that. I would add Bran McMorn.
Yes.
I think that you could do, you look at, if you do a Bran McMorn story the same way as like HBO's Rome, something along those lines, dark, gritty, realistic historical fiction,
Roman Legion Cell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do.
Totally.
And, I think that's something else that could be, another character that, and I think that Worms of the Earth, in my opinion, is one of Howard's, if not his best story, top 3, in my opinion. easy. So those of you that haven't read
Do you
Worms.
think there's cowboy stories that are funny could come across?
I
You
was,
know,
I was
that's
thinking about
a
that.
great
actually.
question.
Or boxing.
Boy, would that ever have to be done
Yeah.
carefully.
The Western kind of medium
Yes.
seems to go through these quick little bursts. Obviously, there was
Yeah.
a huge run of Western movies, back in the day, but
Right time.
now it seems to come back in these little tight waves. If you wrote it just right, if you just hit that moment where, oh, Westerns are hot again, and then you're like, did you know the guy that made a bunch of cool Westerns? I think you might, but you would have to just hit a moving target.
The comedic versions would be tough to do because it's basically exaggerated slapstick that
Right.
Howard understates and making. I threw him through the window as gently as I could, which is hilarious on the page. But how would that translate to film?
Well, I think the way you do that is
really
you
carefully.
literally have, either animate, but one thing you could do is you could have the narration always be very matter of fact, while the visuals are these wild, punch-ups and exactly that. I throw them out the window, it's calm as I get, and it's shattering through the thing or whatever. So it would be the dichotomy of the voice or the narrative. It's almost like, I'm not the Wonder Years, but you have this person telling you a tale very matter-of-factly while crazy crap is happening.
It's almost like you know something about visual storytelling.
That's how I would be really
Well, the Coen brothers did it, right?
Right, yeah. In many ways, it would almost be like, kind of Coen Brothers, kind of kooky.
Right.
Yeah, and just play up that element of
Yeah,
it.
I think you're right, the timing would have to be right. It would have to be
Sure.
one of those moments where that kind of thing would work in that particular time.
One of the difficult parts is by the time a trend is in the public eye, you can't start a production. It's already going to be gone. Same thing with publishing. People do this all the time, like, oh, vampires are hot again. You're like, if you don't have the novel already, going through that
They're already
publishing
on the
system,
werewolves.
yeah, they're onto zombies. Sorry, you missed
Right.
it.
Exactly. You mentioned animated. That's been kind of an interesting thing. One of the things I've had some conversations about. We talk about different generations that have come to Howard and that are interested in Howard stories and how they got here. And for a lot of older folks, it was the Lancer paperbacks. Gen Xers, it was the comics or the Arnold movie. What I've noticed is we're actually getting a lot of new younger fans in their 20s, Zennials, right, that are coming to it through the Conan Exiles video game, right,
Yep.
which is hugely popular.
Yeah, I mean, they have, they've moved millions of copies of
right?
that game.
Yeah, and so you see people coming in, hey, where can I read these original stories, right? One of the
If
big,
you look on YouTube for Conan the Barbarian, there are more Conan Exile videos than there are Conan movie
100%.
videos.
by
Guaranteed.
far, yeah, by
Guaranteed.
far, which is
Playthroughs and analysis and strategies and
yeah, it's incredible, right? And the generation we're missing, though, to some degree, has always been millennials, which is a huge generation. But what I've been finding, because I hang out on Reddit a lot, which is very millennial heavy, right? There are a lot of people there that came to the character from the Conan Adventure animated series in the 90s that almost nobody remembers, or at least no like brains like me remember, right?
We weren't the right age
We
for
weren't
it.
the right age.
So when you watch it, you're like, well, this is terrible. You're like, but imagine you're 8 years old
Right.
and the character has this mythic presence and whatever.
Yeah.
I've had people message me and they're asking me about there's a bird character and they're like, when's he going to show up in the thing? And I don't even know who that character is, but to them, that's like part of Conan. You know what I mean? They're like, well, I can't promise you anything. Maybe a background, like there's a bird in a market, and you'll go, oh, it's red like the thing. I don't know.
But it really is a generational thing, right? The mediums that are, that certain generations are attracted to and come to these characters.
You said video games.
Fascinating.
Right? Do either of you guys play video games?
I played, some.
Yeah.
Not for years.
Okay. So I want to see. I'm obsessed with the Souls games. Dark Souls and Bloodborne and
Notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
Right.
The Elden Ring and all that stuff. I want like that kind of brutal action, vicious kind of exploration thing. I would love to see like Conan in that kind of a style of game where you just gotta fight and like that the fights are brutal and that you have to be watching everything around you because any mistake will take you out. So that when you succeed, like I'll be playing these video games and my wife is watching me and she's like, you're doing this for fun, right? Like I'm just thing popping and I'm sweating but when you beat the thing, it's like this euphoric,
Right.
I got you.
Yeah,
I did
I think
this.
it'd be cool. Why are you talking to me? Why aren't you looking at the camera talking to the
Well,
Funcom
we
executives
really-
right there that are probably
Because we
watching?
need a Souls-like game. Someone should pitch that. A story idea, maybe a premise. That would be cool.
And when you need a consultant, just saying.
I don't want, by the way, I don't want people to say like, oh, they're doing a thing where they're teeing up that they're gonna announce a thing. There is nothing.
No, this is honestly.
I'm literally just pitching for a job right now.
Frederick says, since you both work for Heroic Fans, signatures and that, get back on track.
Oh,
That's right.
Bye, Conan Comics.
That's right. But it is amazing to think about. I grew up, this weekend I've been feeling foolish. I say, I grew up in a little town east of Toronto, and I go, not Cross Plains little, but you know, like I grew up and to think about as a kid reading those books and seeing that movie or being a part of this gargantuan legacy, without being too cool, we stand on the shoulders of frost giants, like that this thing is bigger than all of us, and it will outlast all of us, and that we get to have our time to contribute to it and feel, that love and be swept up in it is so special, and it's hard to explain to people, when you get to do it, and then have people respond and tell you have not screwed it up,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, why don't we pitch it out to the audience? I know we probably have lots of questions. Jason was up first.
I want to say one thing. I understand the purism point of view, but I think in Howard fandom, you come to often from these popular culture, places. Then as you are initiated into the fandom, you start to learn that stuff is bad. So
bad.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. It's like as you because I came in because of the Schwarzenegger movie.
Sure.
And then as you start to learn more about Howard and you get to know the super fans, it's just like slow, but it seems like there's this attempt to kind of direct you towards the original texts. And I don't know if I'm making any sense. Like there's this movement towards.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that.
No, I would never do such a thing.
Like I said earlier, whatever brought you to the dance, I don't think it's a problem. All the time I get people saying to me, they hate the dullard, simpleton character of the movie. They hate that he, of few words. Not that Conan is crazy verbose, but he's much more well-read. He knows multiple languages. He becomes a king by his own hand. He's a capable leader. He is full of multitudes in terms of the original text. And the movie plays to the strengths of the actor at that time. He is a physical presence, In the original, he was going to be narrating that film with his voice, and they realized that wasn't going to work. But so you've got to give them credit for pivoting and doing the best with what they've got and elevating it, right? And it has cast such a long shadow in terms of pop culture. At first, I think any of us who work on this stuff, you have a moment where you hate that the movie becomes the touchstone for every conversation. That the minute I say, hey guys, I'm doing a new Conan thing, and then someone goes, you can answer the riddle of steel, and you're like, crush your enemies.
Yes,
and you're like,
we are.
but I realized the potency of that. Yeah. The very fact that you know that. The very fact that you know crush your enemies driven before you, Lamentations.
It's almost a call and response.
It is a call and response. And that instead of, you can get angry and you can wag your finger and do all that thing, that doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't make someone excited to find more, to be more involved, and to be excited. All you're doing is you're being a snob. And that's not to say that I don't have my opinions or whatever. And if you're here, if that's all you're going to get out of it, I feel that's unfortunate because there's so much more depth to find. But whatever brought you to the dance, right? So now, it's almost like a dead cat bounce. Like I've kind of come back and I'm just like, yeah, man, when someone just says, what is best in life? And I'm like, working on this book is what's best in life, or I'll play the call and response, or we'll do the, spoilers, in issue 11 of the Conan series, we introduced the iconic Atlantean sword because it's become iconic to the character visually for so many years that everyone sees it as part of the Conan legend. And it's not, of course, the original thing. But Kryptonite was not part of Superman. They didn't work at the Daily Planet. There was no Jimmy Olsen. But I don't think anyone would really fight tooth and nail that those things are not part of Superman. And there's a point where that's not to say I'm going to make the Arnold movie canon, or that all of a sudden that is the new origin of the character. But I think that you can absorb iconography, for example, and make it part and parcel without betraying the source. You know, that's not to say that I'm going to be perfect at it, but one of my goals, and one of the things when I proposed this new publishing initiative, was to say we're celebrating all of it. You know.
I thought the sword acted as more of an Easter egg than anything else.
Sure, and it's not like it's going to
fans
be.
are going to just wake up and see it and go, oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's so cool.
Which reaches out to them.
Yeah, it's not, the story's now not called Conan and the Atlantean Sword. It's just part and parcel of the thing, you know what I mean? And that you look and you go, that's cool. And we've got other stuff coming down the line that is going to be in that way. And if you know, you know, and you kind of wink and nod and go, that's cool, right? And you go, yeah. And if you don't, it's just a damn good yarn.
Yeah, gotcha. I'm gonna call it Indy here because I got a feeling I know what you're gonna say and give us some context here. Which is gonna be good.
Regarding Robert E. Howard and pop culture, maybe you could address all the activity that he and Conan are generating on the internet, specifically Facebook and other websites.
Absolutely.
And YouTube
How
now,
many,
right?
how
is
many
big.
people are
Right.
coming to Robert E. Howard because they like Conan?
The Facebook groups are intense. Like once I got announced on the relaunch, a lot of invites for these Facebook groups, and I told people I won't be able to post regularly, and said, no, it'd just be great having the mix, and seeing people's collections, and seeing their shared excitement, and their renewed interest. You know, retailers telling me that people are coming, starting a pull file for the first time in over a decade, that they don't just come in and pick up the new issue of Conan, they're buying back issues, they're looking at other books in the stores. It's invigorating their excitement for the medium and for fandom again, in a way. I did New York Comic Con in October, and I had maybe 8 or 10 of these guys old enough to be my dad, and they came over and they shook my hand really vigorously and said, you really did it, you know, this is the Conan I remember, and I'm very heartfelt. And then I did Seattle in March, and there were probably 60 or 70 of those people. Right. And retailers like wanting to hug me and stuff. It was really intense. It was great. You know?
But to get to Bill's point, like getting people back to Howard through this, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things that we're seeing is, you know, and I want to kind of go back just to follow up on that last point to the idea. You know, a lot of the you were making as well, Jason. A lot of the purist movement, you know, you got to understand that, and that's in the context of pushback against the fact that there were for decades, literally, you couldn't get authoritative versions of Robert E. Howard's actual text, right? And so that was where there was a lot of the pushback. Until, you know, eventually the Wandering Star and Del Rey versions came out, which was a huge achievement because now it's out there. Now you have people like me that do academic work. I have an authoritative version of the text that I can cite, for example, and quote from, rather than something that may have been edited and may have somebody else's hand in it, right? So a lot of that purist movement was a pushback against that. And that battle is now won, right? Nobody, all of Howard's works are now out there between the Del Reys and the works that are published by the REH Foundation. All of Howard's major works are now in print and they're not going anywhere, right? So nobody can touch that anymore. That's there, it's sacrosanct, and it's solid. And so now, I feel like it's easier now to go and play in that wider sandbox, you know, and I think, you know, that's something, you know, even we talked about when we were, you know, coming here. He's like, oh, they're going to hate me. I read Cassidy. No, it's okay. It's okay, right? Because there's no danger from that anymore. Yeah. There's no danger in Howard being diluted from other properties. Those Del Reys are out there, right? And to get to Bill's point, here's what we're seeing now. When you get new people coming in from the Conan Exiles video game, or they've read the comments, you know, or whatever, they're coming in now. They're, hey, I want to read some of the original stories. Where should I start? There's so much stuff. And instead of it being like me or Mark Finn or the regular guys that are out there, oh, I always get to Del Reys. It's people I've never heard of all of a sudden chiming in and saying, you need to get the 3-volume Del Rey set. That's the real version of how, you know, like, oh, they're using our talking points. Just randomly on the internet. People, like, the message has gotten out there now. That's what tells me we've really won, right? We've won. You know, that's huge. We don't even have to make that argument anymore. People are doing that. And so, you know, just to give an example, right, in the Free Comic Book Day issue, we have James Allison in there sort of as a character that's sort of a framework device, for introducing some of Howard's other characters. And for those who don't know, James Allison is the character that has, remembers his past lives as, a warrior in the Hyborian Age and post-Hyborian Age era.
And there's three
completed stories:
Yeah.
Valley of the Worm, Garden of Fear, and Marches of Valhalla. And then a number of fragments. And so we immediately got people asking, hey, where can we, is that in the Del Rey? I literally have people, hey, are any of these James Allison stories in Del Rey's? You want to read these James Allison characters? The Foundation is literally just printing, like, Swords of the North right now is like on its way, literally to the printers when this is coming out. I'm like, just hang on, it's about to be out there, right? But it is happening, right? People are being drawn back to these Howard stories and not just Conan. That's the great thing that, for me as a Howard guy, that we're doing with this Blackstone crossover.
Absolutely.
Everybody's, they're doing a crossover. Well, yeah, you know what? Now people are going to learn about El Barak. They may already know about Solomon Kane, but they're going to get more Solomon Kane. They're going to get Dark Agnes. They're going to get Conrad and Kirwan. They're going to get some of these other characters that they may not have been introduced before. Oh, Howard wrote Lovecraftian occult detective stories? Really? He wrote, Indiana Jones style adventure stories, So people are gonna come to these other stories, not just Conan. They're gonna come to some of the other characters as well.
It's a way for us to raise all ships on that tide.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that's what's really important, is when we sat down and we were looking at doing these things, it's like, what is the best way for us to elevate and for us to educate and entertain? Like our job is, entertainment. We've got to entertain and engage, because that'll keep people on board and keep them discussing things. And one of the things people said to me is, are you guys going to adapt the original Howard stories? And I said, no, they've been done wonderfully in comics already, multiple times. Unless we can bring something new to the mix, we can't surprise people. Even if it's a beautiful adaptation, the plot points. I don't want to be a cover band playing the hits over and over and over and over and over again on someone else's song. We have to surprise you month to month, or it's not going to be scheduled reading. You're just going to, I'll pick it up eventually, because it's Tower of the Elephant. I know how that plays out, even if it's beautiful, And so for me, it's like, how can if I can create a cliffhanger that you literally don't know what's coming next, and you're telling your friends about it, this thing's crazy. You're like, great, that's what I want to do,
Yes.
I do a lot of work on Japanese, I'm a historian, I do work on the Japanese anime media mix, and Conan is interesting, Robert E. Howard is interesting because, of course, it's an organic media mix, right? My question for the three of you is, did you ever get any pushback from editors, publishers, or rights holders about a plot point that you wanted to do that they made you change? Or have you had a lot of freedom in deciding what happens with your characters?
Yeah, John, what about you?
Not one thing. Now, when I submitted my manuscript, I had the villainous sorcerer of Emerald Lotus swear by some gods that the editor thought weren't in the Hyborian pantheon. I told them I'd taken them from a Clark Ashton Smith story, and they let them go. So that's not so bad.
So a lot of people have asked me, they said, when you were doing the monthly book at Marvel, they must have really censored you or things like that. And I said it multiple times in interviews, I'll say it again, that's not true. Like, Marvel has a PG rating, by default for their books, and I knew that going in, so I know the guardrails. Sometimes you push to the bleeding edge of that, sometimes literally, as much as possible. In terms of violence or in terms of, let's say, romantic content. But I knew what those limits were. And, if Roy Thomas can do it, then, there's ways to do it, to make something shocking and powerful and exciting. One of the things that's been nice about the new series is, yes, it is mature rated, so I no longer feel even that self kind of filtering, that I just go, is this appropriate? We can push it as far as we need to push it. We can surprise people with that kind of shocking pulp-esque kind of violence and things like that. I'm sure there are little plot elements here and there, if I went back through my notes or things, but an editor's job is to strengthen the work. I think one of the misgivings that people have about editorial is they think that it's a fight. Like, I'm the creative person and this is the corporate stooge and they're gonna wreck my creativity. And it's like a good editor, a damn good editor, should be looking at the material, seeing the core concepts, and providing clarity and improving the work. That they are looking and saying, thematically, I see what you're going for, and it's not quite coming through. I want to get you there. They're not trying to fight against you. They're not trying to grind against your concepts. They're not trying to wear you down. everyone should be working on this thing to make something we're all proud of, you know? And yes, sometimes there are corporate expectations or marketing needs or deadlines to be met, of course, and these are the limitations we're put under, or, you know, budgets, all that kind of stuff. But we're all hopefully coming to it with the best foot forward to make an amazing thing. And a good editor is someone who is having an active discussion with you, and by the time you finish those notes, you believe them and you want to execute them because you want to see that vision too. You know what I mean? It's not like, ugh, the notes, the evil, cruel, destructive notes. You're like, that's not a good working relationship. And it's not to say I've never had notes that I disagree with, but now my job is to communicate and convince. The reason why I did it that way is because of this. Do you not see this? And we're gonna have an active discussion, you know what I mean? If it's just, I'm gonna take my toys and go home, like, that's not professional. That's not, we're not winning together, you know what I mean? This is collaborative. It's not my property. If I wanna have 100% complete control, I can make my own original stories, now thankfully from the writer of Conan the Barbarian and Dungeons and Dragons and the Avengers, and hope that a fraction of that audience will check it out based on the shine that I took from those big fat IPs.
My job is to give those cruel notes. It's kind of fun, like, you know. So I'll get, you know, I'll get stories and things run by me, and I'm, oh yeah, no, you can't do that. Here's why, you know, blah 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 blah. But I try to do it in a way that is constructive. Right?
Jeff's playing it up like he's the cruel, you know, taskmaster guy on it. He's actually a wonderful collaborator. One of the reasons why is, for the same reason that a good editor does the thing, he says, what are you trying to do?
Right.
In the original text, it's like this, and you're not quite doing it.
Let's find a way to get to where you want to be,
my
keeping
favorite,
it within canon, or at
my
least not
favorite
inconsistent.
Shanks conversation
Right.
is when he goes, not only did you do this cool thing, if we take this obscure little bit that only 20 people know about and you put it in there, these guys are gonna freak out.
Yeah, right.
And you're gonna look like a genius.
Let's not, you know, yeah, we're gonna do James Allison. He's kind of a sort of a, you know, metaphorical stand-in for Howard himself, right? We're gonna stick him in Cross Plains. Why don't you stick him in Lost Knob, which is like Howard's fictional version of Cross Plains? Oh yeah, that's cool. It's that kind of stuff. Like 3 people will get that, but those 3 people will think you're awesome. You know,
so it's, you know, it is that whole thing. It is a collaborative kind of element. When I work with an artist, I want to know who I'm writing for ahead of time. The worst is to be determined. You're like, I'm writing a script in a void, and you're like, I hope they like horses, you know, or whatever. It's way better if I talk to that artist before the project starts, and I said, what are you most excited about, Conan? You know, arc 4 of the comic, issues 13 to 16, is in the frozen north because Doug Braithwaite said, I can't get those Frazetta images out of my head in the snow. I want to draw characters getting killed in the snow. It's like, I want you to kill characters in the snow. I will find a way to narratively weave this up there, you know? Like, I want your enthusiasm, I want your excitement, I want your collaboration. That's the job, you know? And so, as much as humanly possible, when Jonas Scharf was starting on the Blackstone stuff, he was at New York Comic Con and I was there as well. We went out for dinner. We'd been sending emails back and forth. You can only put so much emotion behind an email that doesn't sound like a crazy person. But over dinner, man, I can just sweep him up in this discussion and excitement and paint the picture for him and a couple beers in us and let's, you know, we're gonna do this thing. And man, we could have like started a car with the energy in that, you know, at the table by the time we were done with that meal. And now he knows that I'm passionate about it and he's passionate about it. And be damned if those pages that are coming in are just the most wonderful, cool, pulpy things. That's why I love this medium.
A good editor helps make your product better,
yes.
Your story, your creativity better, right?
After Battle of the Blackstone, are there any plans for other properties like Solomon Kane, Dark Agnes, and Inhuman Comics?
Like spinning out off of this, that would be my hope, is that people are so happy. So first of all, in Savage Sword, the new Savage Sword of Conan, we're putting other characters in there. Pat Sturcker, right in the first issue, has a Solomon Kane story. He's doing a wonderful job. It's probably the best art of his career, and he's got a hell of a storied career already. And he is so passionate about doing more Solomon Kane, and you see it. You see it in the art, you see it in the storytelling. That one's not easy compared to Conan, but it's still easier because it's a known character in that broader sense. I would love to see more Cull. I would love to see, you know, Kieran and Conrad is like this dark horse kind of, no one even knows these characters, and if we can make them cool, and I always, whenever I'm talking, I go, in the contemporary storytelling, people go, contemporary, 2024? No, I mean 1930s. When I first say
Contemporary for
contemporary, I mean Howard contemporary. We will never advance the timeline past the 1930s, because that's the pulp we want to sort of generate. But if I can make those characters cool enough to sustain a one-shot or a mini-series, I feel like, we're doing it. We're doing something cool there, yeah.
More questions?
Could you elaborate on your work with Richard Pace, and what was it like working with him?
Oh, sure. So Richard's, I've known Richard for years, and he did work in the fan
Yeah,
scenes.
he did a lot of work for Damon Sasser's REH and Raconteur. Some of you may remember that.
Yeah, and so Richard and I have been friends. Actually, it's really funny. Dave McKeag, he's a colorist. He actually colored some of Rob's covers on some of the recent issues and stuff like that. He's an award-winning colorist. Dave moved to Toronto, where I live, and he just came up to me at a convention a few years ago, walked over my table in Artist Alley, and he just goes, I heard you love board games and role-playing games. I'm like, yeah. He goes, I moved to Toronto. We're friends now. I was like, all right. And we started doing a board game night. And Richard Pace was like, can I get in on this too? So we have a regular gaming group, my wife and friends, and we play board games and we play RPGs and stuff. And when the announcement came out about Savage Sword, Richard was like, oh, this is a dream. Like the original big oversized black and white. How much broken glass do I need to roll through to do this thing? And I, told him I'll see what I can do, but it's not up to me, but I got the contact for Savage Sword. I had 2 self-contained stories I had pitched to Marvel. The Gambler that I mentioned earlier, and the other one was called Leaving the Garden. And it's this tragic, violent, wonderfully awful, tale of Conan getting the absolute crap kicked out of him and nearly dying, and then having to pull himself back from the brink. And I sort of verbally pitched it to Richard, and Richard's like, I deeply want to draw this. We pitched it to Heroic. They said, let's go, and they gave him space to do this. He would come to my house, and he laid out the story on my dining room table, and we were talking page after page and pushing scenes around. It was a very collaborative, holistic kind of process. And then he went at these big, oversized boards with this primacy of this art. He liked the inks, there's spatters, and there's textures. And it does not look like classic Conan art, but it's got this viciousness to it, and it's got this desperation. Like it's like Conan carved it himself out, kind of while he was dying. And I know some fans are like, oh, this doesn't look like the Big John stuff, or it doesn't look like Barry Windsor or any of those kinds of things. But I think he brought an energy and a primacy to it that made it kick. And some of the emotional quality of those scenes, I really like it. And that's what Savage Sword is for. It's an anthology. Every issue you're going to get something new, hopefully something unexpected, maybe your new favorite artist, maybe a writer you've never seen before, and we're going to take you on a ride. And that's what it's there for, And so I'm really proud of that book, and it feels a little full circle to finally get it out there into the world. So.
And John, didn't he illustrate?
I was going to say, Conan City of the Dead is illustrated by Richard Pace.
Right.
And he did a mighty fine job. They're very sharp, imaginative illustrations.
And that's the thing, is that I think the character, again, can contain all these multitudes and different art styles and all these things. And it would be funny, he would be sending the illustrations that he was doing for the novel for you, and they had a different style than what he was doing in the comics, because we felt different things with a different atmosphere, different textures. And it's like, that's cool, man. He adapts himself to the work, to the project. Yeah.
They were really accurate to the novel as well. The first couple of illustrations I saw, I was able to immediately, I knew exactly what scene, what paragraph he was describing. Pretty good work.
Sweet.
Well, I think we're about out of time. If there's one more question, maybe we can take it. If not, we're going to wrap it up because it's probably time for lunch. Well, listen, thank you guys.
Can I ask you a general question?
Real quick,
They're
sure.
supposed one of the notes of if there's supposed to be something starting at 11:30. Is that a misprint? It's supposed to be 1:30?
Yes.
I'm like, oh, I hope so, because otherwise we've run over by half an hour.
Right.
Okay, good, thank you.
If you guys want to sign up for my email newsletter, I've got QR codes or a physical sign-up list here if you want to be kept up to date on projects I've got on the go and shows I'm going to be at and Conan stuff. So.
And also, we'll all be back at the pavilion. If you have any more questions or things come up, please come by and say hi. Otherwise, thank you so much. Let's give it up for all of our panelists here. And thank you all for coming out.